If you don't know your MEQs from your GEQs, or your 3++ from your 4+++, then hopefully this video might help a bit. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a more discussion related video, where today we're going to be talking about some common shorthand, abbreviations and slang in Warhammer 40k. In general, these are the sort of things that might crop up whenever things are discussed over the internet, either in forums, on Facebook, or even in the comments of YouTube videos, and I must say I use them myself from time to time in the actual slides. Warhammer has been around for quite a long time, and during that time it's built up quite a healthy repertoire of short acronyms, and they typically tend to be used to convey a simple concept, or just to save people a lot of time on typing, when the alternative would be 3 very lengthy words that would be used quite commonly. This video is a bit more aimed at newer players, people who might not have seen all of these conventions in action all that much, so hopefully you might be able to recognise a few more of these phrases when you see them bandied about on the internet. I certainly wouldn't worry about trying to know all of them though, it's just the sort of thing that you could either logic out, or you'll just pick up on time if you spend a fair bit of time talking about Warhammer over the internet. So for the rest of this video, I'll just try and run over as many of these as possible, quite briefly with a short explanation. So to start off, 40k is kind of an abbreviation in itself, standing for Warhammer 40,000, the year when the game is set. Games Workshop is the company that makes it, often abbreviated to GW, and in recent years their way of announcing news to us comes via Warhammer Community, which is pretty much their social media presence, and I've seen that abbreviated to WHC a few times. When they make rules changes to models, it can often be either buffs or nerfs. Buffs are to make something stronger, and nerfs are to make something weaker. When Games Workshop release codexes, they'll often be talked about in terms of fluff and crunch, fluff being the background and lore section of the book, and crunch being more sort of the rules and games mechanics. Quite a common acronym online that I've seen is BRB for the Big Rulebook, which is typically the core rules for the edition in question, and I often see Games Workshop's chapter approved books just abbreviated to CA and then the year, so CA 2020 will be this year's chapter approved. Unit types I've often seen abbreviated. These tend to be going back a way, but they have various sort of equivalents. One of the most common is marine equivalents, which would typically equate to something with a toughness of 4 and a 3+ armor save. Sometimes people abbreviate this in this way, so people online could say, yes, that gun's pretty good against MEQ, so pretty good against Space Marines basically. That's also spawned a fair few different versions of itself, such as GEQ for guard equivalent, generally meaning something toughness 3 with a low armor save, TEQ for Terminator equivalent with a 2+ save, and vehicle equivalent, which in the current edition I'd take to be something toughness 7 or 8 with a 3+ save. Saving throw shorthand is also quite a common one. It's an informal system for different sort of saves. 3+ would be typically a normal saving throw, for example, on Space Marines. When models have an invulnerable save, people often write it as 4++ or 3++, might be quite common on Tzeentch Demons for example. And then say 5+++ will be something like Death Guard's Disgustingly Resilient, where you basically roll a dice after the save has been failed to try and save that wound. This is commonly referred to as Feel No Pain type saves, as for several editions that was basically what the rule was called. It was only in 8th edition that they got all their own unique names, despite it being essentially the same mechanic on things like Iron Hands or Death Guard for example. You often hear people talk about rules as written or rules as intended. Rules as written is basically the strictest interpretation of the rules as Games Workshop writes them, and basically just applying it as a strict legal text, and the interpretation being upheld even if it can create some unusual situations in game. People often debate this against rules as intended, or RAI, with what people think that Games Workshop might have been trying to go for a rule, even if they've managed to get it wrong. A good example being the recent Storm Shield debate, where Storm Shield's rules as written could give certain models a 2+ invulnerable save due to the way that the roles were worded, but the majority of people agreed that that probably wasn't the case rules as intended, and Games Workshop later fixed it with an FAQ. In terms of community gatherings, FLGS is a common abbreviation for a friendly local gaming store, typically something that isn't Games Workshop itself, but more like a shop that will sell Warhammer miniatures as well as other things, and is a good space for gaming. I've seen Warhammer World itself in Nottingham abbreviated to WHW, and there's some abbreviations for tournaments as well, with RTT being an abbreviation for Rogue Trader Tournament, harking back to Warhammer 40k's original name in Rogue Trader, and it basically amounts to a small event, maybe something between 10 to 20 people in size. This is opposed to things like Grand Tournaments, which would typically be more like 50 to 100 people taking part in an event, and typically over 2 days. People talk quite a bit about the LVO online as well, the Las Vegas Open, as it's typically the biggest Warhammer tournament going. There's a couple of modelling abbreviations, such as WIP for Work in Progress, where people might post a half-finished model for criticism, and WYSIWYG for What You See Is What You Get, which basically means that your model will be armed with the exact things that it's armed with. and you're not proxying anything as anything else. For dice rolls, one normal dice roll of a 6-sided dice is abbreviated to D6, and Games Workshop commonly uses D3s as well, which is basically rolling a standard dice, halving the number and rounding up, which will give you a result of anywhere between 1 and 3. You can put extra numbers in front of a D6 or D3 to show how many dice you're rolling at once, such as 2D6 being rolling 2 dice and then adding the result together. We also have AP for armor penetration of a weapon. Mortal wounds I commonly see abbreviated to MW, and fighting the fight phase is often abbreviated to CC for close combat. If you don't have any more fancy weapons than a standard weapon with no extra rules, then that would typically be called a close combat weapon, or CCW. In game, line of sight is quite important as well, for what models can see each other, and that's often abbreviated to LOS, and sometimes also referred to as TLOS for true line of sight, which typically is Games Workshop's measure of whether models can see each other, whether you can actually physically draw a line between one part of one model and one part of another. It's been a little bit subverted in 9th edition though, with these new obscuring runes and things. The standard datasheets in the codexes are a source in and of themselves. The profiles on the top, as most people know, stand for movement, weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, wounds, attacks, leadership, and saving throw. There are some abbreviations in army building, such as HQ for headquarters, which are basically the characters leading your army and your generals. For super heavies, I often see them abbreviated to LOW for Lord of War, and FA and HS are often substituted for fast attack or heavy support. There's plenty of points going in game. Generally, if people are just talking about points in themselves, then that will be the points cost of the model when you buy it into your army list, but there are other types of points, including CP for command points, the ones you spend on stratagems to activate their effects, VP for victory points, the points that decide whether or not you've won a game or not, and from this new Crusade mode we now have RP for requisition points, the ones that you acquire that you can buy in more things for your Crusade force. I've also seen PL and PR used to represent the power of a model, the number in the top left hand corner of the datasheet, if you're using power to balance your armies rather than points. There are tons and tons of abbreviations for the individual factions and armies. On this slide there are just the Space Marines. I thought an interesting one that often causes confusion is CSM, which depending on who's typing it can be either Codex Space Marines, meaning the Space Marines drawn from the standard Space Marine rulebook, as opposed to the more deviant chapters such as Blood Angels or Dark Angels for example, but it can also mean Chaos Space Marines as well. Typically it'd be whether or not you put a little colon in between the C and SM, but in general it can be hard to work out unless you have context. People also tend to refer to Codex Space Marines as vanilla Marines, as in the ones without any specific extra flavour. Pretty much most chapters can be fairly easily abbreviated, as you can see by this list. For other factions and armies, one that sometimes can cause a bit of confusion is AM, which could either stand for Adeptus Mechanicus or Astra Militarum, and they're both common abbreviations, seeing as they're both quite wordy to actually type out. Adeptus Mechanicus is also commonly abbreviated to AdMech, and as Astra Militarum used to be Imperial Guard, so they're often referred to as Guard or typed out as IG. Not IF as I've written here as a typo, that will make me think Imperial Fist. The Adeptus Sororitas used to be called Sisters of Battle, so they're often abbreviated to the rather unfortunate SOB, or Sisters, or AS. I've seen Imperial Knights referred to as IK, and Death Corps of Krieg are often referred to as DKOK, as that one's quite wordy to type out. Death Guard and Thousand Sons are commonly abbreviated, Thousand Sons interestingly often being abbreviated to 1K Sons, for 1K standing for 1000, and despite Games Workshop renaming Eldar to Eldari, Craft Worlds are still often referred to as Craft World Eldar CWE. There's an absolute ton of faction-specific war gear that's abbreviated. Again, I won't go through all of them. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory, though AC could refer to autocannons or assault cannons, depending on whether you're playing Imperial Guard or Space Marines. Land Raiders are quite often abbreviated as well, particularly things like LRC for Land Raider Crusader. Finally, for Space Marines, I often see And They Shall Know No Fear abbreviated as well, just because it's a really common rule for their army, and it's very, very wordy to type out indeed. Finally, I've just included a few other faction-specific bits. The Chaos Greater Demons with their fairly long names are often abbreviated, such as KOS for Keeper of Secrets, and often the Chaos Marks are abbreviated in a similar way, such as MOK for Mark of Khorne. Some common Orc ones I've seen are KMB for Custom Mega Blaster, Custom Force Field for KFF, and PK for Power Claw. Basically there's absolutely tons of different factions, all of which can have their own shorthand, and it's usually fairly obvious through context. To be fair, most of the time it's fairly easy to work out if you know that faction's choices and options, and it can certainly speed up list writing or communicating with people what you mean over the internet. If there's anything really obvious or confusing that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments below. I really was quite surprised just how many common acronyms have built up once I really started to look into it. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for regular 40k content every day, though usually with a more gaming and tactics focused slant than this one. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which is found down in the video description below. If you were thinking about buying any model soldiers in the near future, and you'd like to help support the channel, Element Games is a discount retailer based in the UK, and they offer a decent percentage off any Games Workshop products. If you make an order after clicking the link in the video description, then a small amount of the money goes to help support the channel without costing you any more at the actual time that you buy. It can be a way to help support on purchases that you would have made anyway. For anyone living in the USA and Canada, I also have an Amazon affiliate link as well. That works basically in exactly the same way. If you were thinking about buying anything on Amazon in the near future, if you click the link before doing so, a small amount goes to help support the channel, and it doesn't cost you any more. Again, can just be a way to help support on things that you were planning on buying, whether they're Games Workshop miniatures or something completely different. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.